Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in, and in this video I'm wearing my fancy jacket because we're talking about economy. As I've mentioned, economy is one of those factors that not only as an immigrant but as an American we should kind of pay attention to it, especially with the changes that is happening on this crazy world we should call it, and of course us people and everyday Joe realizing that we should look after each other more than ever and look after ourselves and our family and not rely so much on higher powers, on our government, on our banking system and everything else to kind of look after us. So in this video we're going to talk about the economic perspective of it, talk about the American culture a little bit, but mostly talk about the history and why the Americans are relying or trusting the U.S. banks. And we're talking about the regional banks and talking about some of the larger ones less than ever. In this video, we're going to talk about certain historical factors or historical dates and events that took place that really kind of demolished the whole trust. What are the things that the U.S. and the government has done in order to kind of act sneaky or protect themselves and the banks in compared to people, and in general how people have reacted to it, and how those people who kind of understand the economy have watched my videos and kind of know the number, run the numbers, and analyze everything else, have acted towards seeing certain actions from the U.S. government and the banks in general. So stay tuned. If you don't know much about the history of the banks, if you are curious to see how it plays out in the American culture because you're an immigrant or somebody who is planning to come here, and most importantly, you want to know what are these new perspectives that often comes out that really hates the U.S. banks, or especially from 2023 or 2008 shows this inclination of people not wanting to deal with banks. All right, I'm trying to do my best and hopefully we can put everything into one video. All right, so one thing that is happening, as I've mentioned, is that American people are trusting banks less than ever. And we kind of see this whole scenario kind of spiked up after the pandemic or during the pandemic, where majority of people were kind of stuck in their houses. And of course, they had to go through YouTube in order to basically not kind of kill time, but make something out of their day. All right. And what we have noticed, unfortunately, is that a lot of gurus have become into this space that are advertising for false hopes that people are kind of fudging to it. But also we have seen that people have become more and more educated with how extensive the media has become and how amazing certain YouTube channels are with providing people with information, which kind of shove them into this different category and kind of thinking out of the box in compared to what their parents knew and they told them, or what the school has been teaching them. And as a result of that, a lot of people have traveled into investing in real estate, investing into Airbnbs, investing into the stock market, become a day trader or swing traders, and a lot of these factors. Because again, it's just one of those things that came out of this whole subject of not trusting the banks. All right, so let's go through the whole history of banking. Now, the banking, it's very much a private community. It is run by certain people, and often they will do their best to not regular people understand much about what is going on with them. All right. However, there are certain historical facts or incidents that has happened that kind of it was just like something that they can't run away from, and had to kind of deal with these people understanding certain factors and realizing, hey, certain things that they've been telling us, certain things that they've been hiding, it just doesn't add up. And we have to kind of think for ourselves and invest our money ourselves instead of just like going with the tradition of, hey, let's put or save our money in banks. All right. So the whole thing, I would argue, started from 1971, if I'm not mistaken, which is considered as a Nixon shock. And I'm gonna double check my facts. Yeah, it was August of 1971, which was called Nixon Shock, when President Nixon basically took off the gold as something that was backing the dollar. All right, so he did that whole thing before you would be able to just like take your money to the bank and they will give you this similar value as of that dollar in gold, meaning the banks also were holding some gold just in case somebody wanted to trade it. I mean, the possibility of this happening perhaps wasn't that high that people would just trade their dollars for gold, but the fact that people knew something valuable as gold was backing their dollar kind of gave them that insurance, you know. However, from 1971, Nixon basically took off that gold factor that was backing dollars and instead said that us, the government or the banking system, is backing the dollar. Now, we have to kind of familiarize ourselves with the history of the U.S. in order to understand what gave Nixon that power, that confidence that he could do such a move, or he could kind of aim for such a thing, because it was kind of a bold move. It was a move that a lot of baby boomers, meaning the generations of our grandfathers that are currently living, did not like it. And to this day, we'll talk heavily against it and say that the whole thing that we're witnessing with inflation and inequalities is coming out of that one historical fact. And basically saying that if we still had that system, none of these would have happened. Okay, so but why? How? Nixon will get that confidence, or U.S. will be in such a position to make such a bold move. And if we want to understand that, we have to kind of look at the World War II and the history. Because after World War II, of course, one of these benefactors of the U.S. is that it is kind of further away from other countries. I mean, if we're talking about certain European countries with World War One and World War II, we'll see that how close they're placed one to another. As well as if we're talking about Asian countries, specifically Southeast Asian, or Middle Eastern countries, we will see that they also are put together in a close approximately. All right, that's why when the wars break out, they can kind of influence one another. And in the case of World War One and World War II, people or countries will come into different groups which back another up, which means those countries were affected. And as we have seen with the Israel and the Gaza war, we would see that even if a country is very powerful and has all the military equipment and everything else, and it has amazing support from the US and all the Western countries, which literally like babysitting them, they still can endure these economical difficulties. And if you don't believe me, you can look it up and see a lot of documents that have come out within the past month that talk about how the stock market over there, how the businesses, specifically smaller businesses, are suffering ever since the war took place or have started. All right, so US was kind of out of this whole World War II. Of course, they were involved to some point, but they weren't as affected as majority of European countries and in certain countries and in certain occasion Asian countries. All right, because we know that kind of European countries always had that power over the Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries and used them even in the case of world wars. All right, but US was kind of doing its own thing. So when the whole thing debacled, it was at a better place, for a lack of a better term, in compared to a lot of other countries, which eventually, with a lot of hustling and great, laws and everything else that was in place, and of course capitalism, it was able to accelerate and stay on that level, and for years and years put itself as the number one country or a number one economical country from economic perspective. All right, so that really gave the US that upper hand in compared to other countries. But also, they've pushed other deals on the side. These sneaky moves that I talked about, they pushed the whole thing with Saudi Arabia, and they were like, hey, if you guys, and especially back in the days, until to this day, a lot of countries required oil to take care of their day to day expenses and everything else. And they were like, hey, the whole petrol dollar, if you can sell these oils in dollar, so those buyers have to also inquire and hold on to dollars in order to make these exchanges happen, we would appreciate it and we will back you guys up. Military wise, we will sell you equipments that we perhaps might not sell to other countries. And if you guys run into any problems with like these other Middle Eastern countries that are less developed in Red Sea, we can come and protect you guys, you know? Just sell those oils in dollar. And they were like, okay, nice. So not only other countries that now wanted oil had to acquire dollar, they had to kind of invest in the US and the treasuries and all of that. And they have to go after dollar. So dollar was at its highest power as it possibly could be. But now it was used on a daily basis from things such as oil. And I bet other markets have learned from this whole transaction and this whole incident. And they were like, we also want to collect dollars, you know, for the things that we're selling you, this neighbor country. All right, so and then that really valued the US dollar and put it as this world currency that everybody is using in order to, you know, have that valued asset to kind of pay for things that they want or receive as a source of payment when they are doing a transaction with another country or another region. So those were the factors that kind of made the US or the whole Nixon shock to be able to take place. All right, now that we talked about the whole thing, let's talk about how the banks kind of played out in here. All right, of course, a lot of people did not like this because if they follow my channel, and that you should do by pressing that subscribe button and liking this video because I put out amazing videos and knew some economic, they would know that, hey, if you are just like taking out that gold that is a more scarce factor from this game, then that means the US, the government, can just print this money on a thin air, right? So because they don't have to back it up with any gold, and they can just like oh, another thousands of this, another 2,000s of this. So that can in future bring the value of the money down. And in addition to that, another incident happened where when the US government was like, hey, people, you have to bring all your gold to us, the banks were kind of backing up the government. And in certain cases, they even helped them with like, hey, we wanted to let you know if you have any gold in your safe deposit box, we might inquire it because the government has told us that you have to turn them over. These safe deposit boxes that are supposed to be safe from people in the bank, right? The only other person that has to have access to it, it has to be the owner or their relatives, okay? If they given permission, of course. But then the banks kind of playing that sneaky part and be like, hey, we have to kind of go with the big boss, with the government, you know? And although we're not supposed to know what you have in your safe deposit box, but we kind of have to turn it in if it's gold, right? So that plus the whole thing, the Nixon shock, really was like the very first factors or the historical incidents that kind of took away this trust from the banks and kind of people really looking at them as this trusty to say the least. And then another significant incident could be pointed out at 2008, which really made a lot of people think about investing in the real estate and looking after themselves. And people like the founder of the Bitcoin says, hey, we all know, especially if you are a little bit into this game of the numbers, we all know how to fix the system, but they're not doing it. So how about I put together a system that does that? And that's why we see the Bitcoin being born and the whole ideology behind it, which you can learn more by reading the white paper. And I can, of course, put together a different video. But the point is, 2008 is another date that the whole thing kind of got worse. Why? Because the U.S. economy was horrible, right? And then one of those factors that were under a huge pressure were the banks. And your favorite president, the president who dropped all those bombs, got itself involved into 3 wars and still received a medal, right? He was like, we will just buy them out. We will bail them out. It's okay. We have to save this economy. What it meant was that they had to print a lot of money in order for not let it to happen, not let it for these banks to go down. But those people who know the economy, they know that these cycles happen in the system. And we just had to work it out in a better way than just bail them out with printing money. So those who knew the numbers, they knew with printing more money, we will have more of that asset in the system, which means the value of the money is going to come down. Not eventually, because the country was in horrible shape at the time in 2008, but it will come down in the future years. So what they did is that they slowly started to not trusting the banks, and they were like, instead of putting my money into the saving accounts that pays me nothing, or going out that traditional way of thinking that I have to save money, I'm thinking about my retirements. Especially if I do the math, I would see that by spending money, I probably will have a more valuable asset in future because they're just printing it. They have the ability, after the whole Nixon Shock, they have the ability to print money whenever they want in order to save their butt buddy, right? The banks. So they started putting into their real estate. They started putting into themselves, investing for their future, for their retirements. That's what the baby boomers did, majority of them, and the generation after that. All right, so they acquired these rental properties and they received the money out of it. And then what happened is that, of course, a lot of people started to be like, what if I start purchasing some golds or silver instead of having my bank in the account, my money in the account, because if they can print it whenever they want, for whomever they want, the value is going to go down. All right, so considerably 2008 was one of those significant historical factors that really take away the trust of people into banks. And that's why, again, we see these systems, we see these people who are investing into real estate properties and now have multi-millions in it because everything has been inflated and we cannot control it, right? And in addition, we see the Bitcoin being so successful as a type of money, all right, that is going around. Now, after 2008, again, those who had their head into the numbers, they figured certain factors out. And they were more careful into trusting the banks. And now we see that it came to 2020 and the whole pandemic, 2020, 2021, where before the banks had to keep certain amount of your money in them or within the system. However, the government allowed them to basically not even do that and surpass that point. All right, of like, I believe before was like 1/10 of your money. So if you deposited $1,000, they had to keep $100 of it. But then that requirement even got taken away. And what we started seeing more and more, or at least people reporting on them more and more, because of the whole, accessibility to the media got to a better points, is that people started to struggle even accessing their own money. To the point that we have videos of people who are like, oh, I wanted to access my money to purchase gold, to purchase a real estate, but had to wait 3 days and answer to the bank why I need my own money. That's insane. That's crazy. Why should I be doing that? That's my own money. That's my money. So not only that portion that kind of acted similar to the whole taking out the gold, acted as when the federal government was like, hey, you don't need to even keep that portion in the bank. But now the banks not being able to produce the cash immediately for the customers in many cases really take away more and more of the reputation to the regular people or to the population of the U.S. because they were like, I can't even access my money. Maybe I'm better off to put it in my safe deposit box or put it into different assets such as gold that I can at least walk into a gold shop or, gold for cash signs that they have and at least cash up my money immediately, especially if I need it, So that was another factor or two factors that we talked about. And then we see in 2023 that, pretty much started from at the end of 2022 that a lot of people are talking about these videos that have been leaked, that these, people who ran the number and they were like, the banks are in trouble. And eventually in 2023, we saw some of the larger banks in the U.S. failed, such as Silicon Valley. But at that time, the U.S. government was trying to battle inflation. The inflation they themselves created by having such a low interest and printing money in 2020. So what they were doing, they were basically collecting their dollars from the system. And so what happened was that they were into that whole, bubble of collecting the money from the system to bring the inflation down. But now this bank failed. And what they did is that they immediately, and there were multiple banks, right? One Republic and all of that. And they were like, yeah, but we want to kind of back up our friends. So how about we print, I believe, a couple $1 billion to pay all those people out and bail these banks out too. Yeah, let's do that. And so more than ever, people were like, something is up. And of course, there are a lot of news that they're like, they had to do it. They probably wouldn't because a lot of these larger tech companies, they had accounts with those, with especially Silicon Valley Bank, which would even exceed the whole $250,000 that FDIC kind of insures. All right, but they didn't want it to see the whole, their tech companies, which is one of the things that the U.S. is so proud of, go underneath that whole thing and get destroyed. So they bailed them out too. And now, in 2024, they're saying that even more banks and the whole banking system is under question. Of course, because they never resolved the problem that they created and that they advanced, all right? But a small system, a very simple system such as Bitcoin has done it. And they can just copy it, and make it even better. But they haven't really taken action towards it because certain people are getting wealthier and wealthier within the current system. And then we are seeing that everything is kind of going against people from trusting these banks. when it comes to their deposits being available, when it comes to all the news and the stereotypes and everything else that says, hey, they're in trouble. And in 2024, a prediction is that more banks will have to kind of adjust themselves into the whole new environment, especially with higher interest rates. Because if we really want to put the whole analytical perspective into these banks that failed in 2023, they did nothing wrong. They were taking the safe route of taking the customer's money, putting them into the bonds, and what happens when the interest rate goes up is that the bonds becomes weaker and not as good of an investment to put your money in them. And so now more and more of these banks who have done the same thing have to pay the price one way or another. So we just have to wait and see. I hope this was useful. This was a lot of research and a lot of historical factors to kind of bring out on the paper and tell you guys. But I think it is very clear that if one thing you guys should take away from this video, A, subscribe to this channel, B, look out for your own future. Be the person who's going to invest on you and your future yourself. Do not rely on the government and this older and broken systems such as 401k or the banking and everything else. And I have to tell you that people who are living in these third world countries, they know this concept very well. All right, that they are the only one who have to look after themselves. I hope this video was useful. Until the next one, peace.